Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa. I am so excited to bring you this hashtag Hold the Line today because this woman not only holds the line, she pushes people back. Kara Swisher, author, reporter, entrepreneur, she's got it all. Kara Swisher, Burn Book is out, came out Tuesday in the United States. It is so good to have you with Rappler, Kara.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being a character in my book. That's another thing people don't really know.
You know, it was
Friend
interesting.
Friend of Maria's.
Oh my gosh. Well,
You're
so
an important fulcrum in the book, of course.
in what sense?
Well, in the first chapter, I talk about this meeting that Trump had with the tech leaders, and they said nothing about immigration or hate or any of the things he had talked about on the campaign. And this is all the stuff that they were so against, anti-immigration attitudes, and his were extreme and cruel. And so they went to this meeting with him, and they said nothing. He used as a photo op, and they're the most powerful people on earth. And they just joked along with them, and I had a problem with it. And I had recalled you had warned me what was coming to the United States because of what had happened in the Philippines, and it also previously happened in Myanmar and other places. And so you had said that we're the canary in the coal mine. I'll never forget when you said that, and you had all this data, and you were trying to get Facebook to pay attention to it, and I couldn't get them to. You couldn't, and I certainly couldn't.
No.
It was a real moment. It was a real moment for both of us, I think. But you had experienced it first.
Actually, our team here, right? And I was hoping that I believed in Facebook. I mean, so go through this stuff, what do you want to happen? Why'd you write this book?
Well, I had thought about not writing a memoir, and I don't like books that much. I do like books to read, but I had written 2 books at the beginning of the internet age, right? At the very start of it with AOL, 2 books on AOL and their history, because they were really the first place the internet was commercialized for most people.
Yeah.
And then heralded in. And I then went on to cover it as a beat reporter and do other things and create companies and become pretty prominent in the sector as the reporter of, record. And I wasn't really I always turn down books about Yahoo or Google or Twitter, or they'd always get offered to me first. And I thought those were sort of, they were small, right? They were just incremental books. And like this happened during this period. And there's a lot of them now on Twitter. Some of them are very good, but I don't think they have a lasting nature to them. And Walt Mossberg, my partner, a well-known tech writer, who had built several businesses with, decided not to write his memoir. And I sort of felt like someone should say what these people were like, not only for the historical record, but because people should know, especially because we're at this another cusp with artificial general intelligence. And so right now is a perfect time to do that, to say that to people.
No, that's
what it was like and what happened and how we can prevent it going forward.
And we'll dive into that. But let me, for the folks watching, I'm going to pull out just two quotes from the book. And this is the first one. It's on chapter 5, the mongoose. You already know who I'm talking about. I just love this part of it where it says, "From the start, I had no doubt that Jeff Bezos would eat my face off if that is what he needed to do to get ahead." This is the way she writes it. She goes right to the core, what she sees, and then your next sentence is, "Feral, in fact, was the first word that jumped into my head." So this is the first time you meet Jeff Bezos. You weren't that impressed with him, right?
Yeah, I was not what? I'm sorry.
You weren't that impressed with him.
Oh, no, I wasn't unimpressed. No. Feral is more that he moved around. He was so peripatetic. He was so aggressive. I was impressed with him. I was definitely impressed with him. I thought he was so aggressive. And when I say eat my face off, that was it. He contrasted a lot with the people I covered in Silicon Valley who wore fleece and I'm trying to save the world. I'm in flip-flops. Let's have some kombucha. So I wanted to contrast him with them because he was much more business focused, aggression, and the companies are the DNA of the people who started them. I'm sure Rappler is or whatever. And that company, was him, was the personification of him. Or he was the personification of it. but
You
it
know,
took on his characteristics. So I wanted to talk about that. I just thought he would run right over me if he needed to get whatever he wanted.
and it was actually a great chapter because I knew him. We were in college together, right? We were
Oh,
classmates, and
I
we
forgot that.
graduated
That's right, at
the
Princeton.
same year.
At
Yes.
Princeton.
But I want to go to your next one, to me here, and let's pull this one up. This was Mark Zuckerberg, and something we all read when you wrote about the expensive education of Mark Zuckerberg. This is a time when you had him on the code stage, and then he started sweating, which was hilarious. Guys, you have to read what was going through Kara's mind when this tech mogul. You say it, Kara, and then I'm going to read the last sentence that closes that chapter.
He had come to my code conference. It had become sort of the place to come to prove yourself, right? If you were going to be big, you had to face us, essentially. And everybody came. And we didn't have any rules for that. They couldn't know what we were doing on stage. They just had to come and face us. And so the first time he came, it was with Sheryl Sandberg, who had just hired. And she's a smooth operator, if you ever want to meet one. And so she could handle it, and he was much better. He had always been super nervous around me whenever we met, at Facebook or whatever. And then, and seemed not distasteful, he wasn't very good, socially or with interfaces with people. And so that was a good interview for him with Sheryl, because she could handle and smooth things over. But then he was coming by himself, on stage. It was his first big interview with me and Walt Mossberg by himself. And he went into a flop sweat for whatever reason. He had an anxiety attack, or he said he was sick, maybe at the flu, but he started sweating profusely, like apparently and profusely, which was really uncomfortable because it was hard to avoid. And so he had to take off his hoodie because I thought he was going to faint. And he didn't faint, but I was worried. He's turning white and everything. And we were at the time asking questions about privacy.
Yeah.
And I don't think he had answered questions like that for weeks in advance over a bunch of privacy practices they had that were abusive to consumers. And so that wasn't it. It was weird. And then it got famous. It got really famous that he did that. I felt bad for him. I never thought that was a good moment in my interview history. People seemed to like it. I didn't think that was good. I thought making someone uncomfortable physically is not really my goal.
Which actually was what was interesting when you were writing it. You were trying to find ways to help him, actually.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. I have my mother instinct went in. He's, quite a bit younger than me. And so, it was just, I sort of was trying really hard to get him back on track. Because one of the things that's really interesting with these people, a lot of people are like, go get him. I don't want to get him. I want him to answer questions, right? Yeah. My job is to get him to answer questions. And so that was what I was focused on more than anything. And it was hard because he was really, he had a problem going in and what was happening. And so I think the more important interview was one I did 2 years later.
Correct.
We talked about Holocaust deniers, first about Alex Jones and Holocaust deniers. In that case, he was perfectly fine and completely nonsensical, the way he talked about lies and toxic waste and the manipulation of social media by autocrats or terrible people.
But I want to pull that out because that actually was global headlines, right? Because Mark Zuckerberg was saying it was okay to be a Holocaust denier, and then
he said they don't lie, and I was like, but I feel like lying is what they do for a living. These people, and so I in that interview I said, I think they do lie, but tell me about it, because I wanted people to see how ill-equipped this young man was to take on big issues. And he left and he kept them on there for the longest time. And then 2 years to the day of that interview, I think, very close, he took them off. So what changed? Why was it okay? And then it wasn't, because he had to figure it out by himself, because either he didn't have the ability, or he had to learn it. We had to wait for this guy to learn it before all this hate spewed. And I think it happened with you. The delay was what gave Duterte the power. Correct.
And that was the reason why when he did decide, you're right, 2 years later, that he was going to pull it down, I was like thinking, and the same thing happened with us, right? They pulled stuff down after, but then who's responsible for what we've gone through?
Right.
And that's
right, exactly.
That's when you said that this is an expensive education for Mark Zuckerberg, and frankly, the platform should be held accountable. But let me just quote. Let's pull up the page on where you close the chapter on Mark Zuckerberg, and this is fascinating to me. So, guys, you can see here I've highlighted in yellow the ones where Mark Zuckerberg's statement. He struggled with the tension. It took him 2 years. When a news person would actually say this is dangerous and we would be held accountable, and we would take it down.
Yes, that's correct.
But I love,
because you might be sued, right?
Correct.
That's the thing, is you could be sued. And even whatever you think of Fox News, they had to pay almost $1 billion because of mistakes they made. And they made them on purpose. But it just was, and this guy could just sit there and cause so much damage. And when I think about anti-Semitism today in the United States and across the world, I link it directly to that. There's no other way you could it just, that's where it came from. That's how it got here, because he let the seeds get planted, and then of course this mold goes everywhere
and grow, right? Like it's like that. Yes. I've said this to you, the Yuri Andropov quote that disinformation is like cocaine. You take it once or twice, you're okay, but if you take it all the time, you become a changed person.
Right.
So it's almost like our societies, or this is the quote that I loved at the end of it, because it made me gasp in shock, but also say this is spot on. No, so I'm going to read this. No, Zuckerberg wasn't an asshole. He was worse. He was one of the most carelessly dangerous men in the history of technology who didn't even know it. And then here's your kicker. Unfortunately, he wasn't the worst of them. Do you think he still doesn't know it? Or has he just accepted? And
he just appeared in front of a congressional committee, and he in it what was a stunt by one of the Republican senators. He's turned around and apologized to these people. They're right here, and the parents had pictures of their kids up. They had them, sort of as if it was a graveyard there of these kids who had been hurt by various online things, and Mark is quite a bit older. He has children of his own now. He's a more mature man. Turn around, and I could see in his eyes that he saw it, right? Because he's not a cruel man like an Elon Musk. He's a cruel man, Elon Musk is, but Mark isn't. I could see as a father he saw it, right? Like you could sort of see that, but he couldn't bring himself to say the right thing. And what he said is, instead of "I'm sorry for what I did to you," or what my company might have resulted in, "I'm so sorry for what I did," he said, "I'm so sorry for what you've been through."
Yeah.
And that's like saying, "I'm so sorry it's hot outside. It's not your fault." It was such a sort of a weaselly way of saying sorry. It wasn't sorry. You might as well not have said sorry, as far as I was concerned. So, no, I think he thinks people, whatever happens to them, it's not his fault. And if he throws anti-Semitism or immigration or whatever over the transom and lets it go through, and everyone gets poisoned, it's not his fault. And it is his fault. I'm sorry, it is. Part of it is, and not totally, but part of it is.
Do you think there will ever be a point of accountability?
Well, Scott, my partner, says there has to be a perp walk. Right, yeah, Scott Galloway on Pivot. No, why should there be? Now they're super rich, and they can get out of it. They just get out of it. I mean, there's no laws, there's no fines, there's no liability, there's no lawsuits. I mean, you've been to jail more times on ridiculous things than, how many times? What did you do? Nothing. And these people, there's issues around hate, there's issues around anti-Semitism, there's issues around teen girl depression, young men feeling isolated. Nothing.
Yeah.
All the damage. Guess who pays? It's almost like the opiate makers. A long time they didn't have to pay. Same thing with the cigarette manufacturers.
And I love those.
Except in this case, they know. Well, so did they, right? So did they. So
right. So, but it looks like. So I'm going to jump to the end of the book before we go back to your impressions of these incredible, not incredible, these men who rule our lives, right? And how to stand up with a dictator. I was talking about Duterte or Zuckerberg, and Zuckerberg was more powerful than Duterte. To jump to it, it feels like with artificial generative AI, these companies, so DSA has come in and is trying to put guardrails from the European Union. The US, as you pointed out, still has no laws. But but they leapfrogged, and with artificial or generative AI is the first phase of it. It feels to me like they're making the same mistake that they did before.
Well, a little bit. I mean, I think they talk about possible problems. They never did that before. That's a new, fresh thing. So, I think they discuss it, and it's, you'll have Sam Altman saying, well, it's going to change medicine. It's going to do this. It's going to be great. No one's ever going to get cancer again, et cetera. And then he goes, and then the killer robots. So I guess I appreciate him warning us about the killer robots, right? Or whatever it happens to be. But I think a lot more people involved are discussing downsides than ever before. The problem is, once again, our Congress fails to act, right? They don't do anything about it. So what's the difference if nothing's done about it? Talk is cheap. It's an expression in the United States, right? Talk is cheap.
But they're doing the same, part of what made social media, what turned our values upside down, was that they never made a distinction between fact and fiction. Like you would assume they put a blue check on you that means something, but on X right now, it just means you can pay, right? So
that's correct. Yeah.
They actually prioritize the spread of lies over facts, right?
Yeah.
On generative
prioritized
AI,
or just let them happening. But go ahead. Yeah.
But on generative AI, they're doing the exact same thing, because in the thirst for money, and it was something like $50 billion invested in generative AI last year, in that thirst for scale and money, again, they're moving away from what used to anchor a knowledge graph, right? This is what Google used to do. You know Google very well. Instead of anchoring it and being responsible so it doesn't hallucinate, they let go of it, used statistic probabilities, and then kept feeding data thinking that would solve it. I mean, it's not going to work. And that same mistake again, kind of brushing away fact and fiction, not making the distinction.
Yeah, and I had that discussion many times. One time, which is not in the book, and a lot of things I'm suddenly recalling now, right? They're just like, oh, I forgot that one. I was at my own house in San Francisco, and Larry Page was over, and it was my ex-wife worked at Google, so I think it was like a brunch or something. And we were talking about news, and he said, what's the difference if you get it from the New York Times or some other sources, these other ones? I'm like, what's the difference? There's a difference between like bad news sources and good news sources. Oh, let people sort it out. I'm like, but they can't sort it out. You have to help them sort it out. And like, who is trusted news? But he was like, well, they'll figure it out. And I'm like, they won't. It's like throwing all the library books on the floor and saying, good luck, kids.
Right.
And it just was this vexing way they looked at the world, that they had no responsibility for the damage they did. They just don't. They literally, even today, I'm sure they're like, oh, Kara's griping about us. That kind of thing.
But your end is a call to action. And the subtitle of your book is a tech love story, right? Like
it is.
So what do you want us to do?
Well, I want us to push our public officials for sure. I mean, you have a more difficult time in the Philippines, but we haven't passed one law that specifically deals with internet and tech issues. There's no algorithmic transparency law. There's no privacy law. There's no update of antitrust, which would spur innovation.
Yeah.
There's no anti-hacking disclosure laws. You could go on and on and on, right? Yeah. And then we still don't. We just started to talk about things to do about generative AI. I mean, we didn't fix the last thing from 25 years ago, and now the new thing is here. They're talking about it. They're having, bipartisan commissions. But what is that? It's all talk, no action.
Yeah.
And so, we've got to pass laws. One, we have to make it so these companies are liable. Lawyers do a really, really good job at stopping people, whether it's pharmaceuticals or car manufacturers. They're much more careful if they are going to get sued, right? Everybody is much more careful.
And you pointed this out in one of the interviews for the book, where a plane door goes off and there's a ton of investigations, but online nothing is happening. I want to ask you two more things before we close. you called Rupert Murdoch Uncle Satan.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate.
And you said that there was someone worse than Mark Zuckerberg. Tell me about both. Who is worse than? I'm assuming it's Elon Musk. Yeah, go ahead.
Musk, of course. Well, every day, like today, there was a story about one of the congressmen who I like a lot, Mike Gallagher, saying he's like controlling satellites, in near the Taiwan Straits. What is it? This is a guy who came to this country. Why is he? And he, made his way and everything else. And he's a U.S. citizen, but I don't want him running our foreign policy, that kind of thing. So besides that, and he's obviously declining in the full light of day on Twitter, right? Every day, whether he's tweeting anti-Semitic support of anti-Semitic memes or anti-trans or anti-people. I don't think he likes people. That's I've finally come around to it. And so it's really hard to know what's happening, but he has enormous control over many areas, some space stuff and satellite stuff. Obviously, cars, he's gonna lose that edge pretty quickly.
It was incredible how his decision not to give connectivity to Ukraine, right?
Yeah,
determines why. And his reason was because he was afraid of nuclear war. I mean,
well, great. And he can do something about it, I guess. He doesn't understand what he's doing. It's like having a toddler, with the nuclear codes or something. And so that's and then obviously he's got some personal issues that are determining all kinds of things that are really, he's quite unstable is what he is, right? And you never know what he's going to do next. So this is a guy with enormous power who, he's sort of trying to like try out for the position of our next Bond villain, right? That's what he feels like. And I'm a big Bond aficionado. So, what I was joking the other day is if he gets a white cat and starts petting it, we're all screwed, essentially. And then, I talked about Rupert Murdoch because you can't leave broadcast people out of this. You can't just blame everything on tech people.
Yeah.
And this is what tech people like to point out. Well, what about Rupert Murdoch? I'm like, also terrible. That's not really, we're not going to have a stack ranking of terrible things.
Right.
And by the way, Rupert's the king of the pile of that, right? Creating, I think between social media, gerrymandering, and Rupert Murdoch, that's why our country is in the situation it is.
Uncle Satan.
Because Uncle Satan. And so I just because he's very avuncular. That's why. He's when you meet him, he's very friendly and very, he seems harmless, but he's not. He's not harmless in any way. Well, and so he just has created more anger and division in America than almost anybody, I think.
Well, that Smartmatic one was fascinating. But wait, so we've only talked...
he lost a case. He has to pay.
Yeah.
So why, I don't mean to be rude, but why does he have to pay? I want him to pay, by the way. Yeah. But why does he have to pay if, Facebook doesn't have to pay? I don't understand that at all.
Yeah, I agree with you on this. Wait, so we've only talked about the negative, but you had such praise, admiration, and also just intellectually you were taken by Steve Jobs, that he was the real thing.
He was. I mean, I know there's also written about his family, although in the end he got along with all of them. Like, it's not my business, right? I get it. I guess why people want to focus on it. But compared to everyone today, he said a lot of prescient things. He was very thoughtful. He created beautiful products. I believe if he'd been around today, things would have been a little better. Like he made things beautiful, and I don't mean just physically, but I do think he really had a sense of the greater community. If you go back and listen to those interviews, you're like, oh, I wish he was still here. Yeah. Because he was an adult, right? Yeah. And so I just read his sister. He met her later.
Mona.
He had been adopted. Yeah. Mona Simpson.
Yeah.
She's a very famous writer herself in the United States. She's a novelist. And she wrote his eulogy. And I urge people, it was in the New York Times when he died in, I think, 2011. It is so beautiful. And it really did capture his ethos to me. I mean, obviously, it was a eulogy, so I'm not going to say what a jerk this guy was. But it was really correct. He really did. He was a seeker. And I think that we're missing seekers. Yeah. We have a lot of narcissists and people who look at their own belly button, and we need people who look up and out, and that doesn't exist very many people anymore.
And he cared about privacy and the harms he could do, and you pointed this out. This actually puts Apple at a disadvantage today, doesn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't have as much data for AI, that's for sure. You know,
Right.
it has a harder time. Although I'm not feeling sorry for Apple for one
Yeah.
minute. They're the most valuable company on the planet. So
$3
in
trillion.
history,
Yeah.
yeah, I know Nvidia is trying to catch up, but I'm not wasting any tears on Apple.
So in the last few minutes, let's talk about you as an entrepreneur, right?
Sure.
I wish I had been at your last code, man. I didn't realize you
It
had
was good.
actually created all of this. I guess it's clear in the book how, you were inside a large news organization, but you chafed at the old ways of doing things. And you are actually very similar to the way we think in Rappler, which is...
That's right.
And this is a point in the book, right? One of our discussions was the difference between journalism and activism. What's changed?
Yeah, we did.
Go.
Well, because I think I'm a journalist and I covered. At some point, you have a conclusion, right?
Yes.
Or else you're just, I don't know what you are. You just don't tell.
Stenographer. You're a stenographer.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, even more than that, that's if you don't say what happened. The stenographer is just whatever the powers that be tell you to type.
Right.
But, you have to at some point, like watching some of this, like when I was watching, say, a web van, at some point you're like, this is stupid. Like, I can say that because I've studied it, right? Or come to a conclusion about anything. And I think at some point, especially when I left the journal and then I was running my own place, I'm like, let's just say it. Let's just say it based on reporting. Everything was based on reporting. You do that too. Everything is based on reporting.
Right.
And we come to a conclusion then. And, let the whatever, there's expressions, just let those storms come in. That's fine. Look, I can say when Twitter was this recently was charging for the blue, right?
Yeah,
Whatever
yeah.
it was. We studied it, we reported on it, and I was like, no, people, don't do it. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Is that activism? Or when Facebook was doing metaverse, we looked at it, we talked to a lot of people, we studied it, and we said, he cannot stay in this place, right?
Yeah.
And so, and then it does get you to activism where, say, Mark, for example, does that speech and doesn't apologize. Stop well, that's not an apology, everybody, and he's not going to do it, and here's why.
Right.
And so that's what I'm talking about, pressing people and saying, what did you just say? I think my whole life I've been going, I'm sorry, that makes no sense. What did you just say? Is that activism? I suppose, but I don't think it is. I think it's trying to get the truth out.
It feels like analysis. It's like the expertise that you've built up over the years.
Yeah. And I'm often right. So at some point, like with all the bros, they always get mad at me. I'm like, well, I'm kind of right a lot of the time. So you might as well listen to me, right? On some level.
Well, the business of news, this is what we'll end with, right? Because January, February has been a bloodbath in the United States. I shouldn't use that word because of all the world is on
because we
fire.
might have some real bloodbath.
Oh, no, don't say that. But what is the future? The business model of journalism is dead.
It isn't. The old business model is, and it's had been for a while. I mean, if you notice the beginning of the book, they were still in the business model I said was dead then, right?
Yeah.
Classifieds, display advertising, subscriptions, giving subscriptions when you don't have a lot of value to give. You got to have value if you're going to sell something to someone. And so it was dying before. What's happening is anything that's out of line with revenue and costs, you cannot do now. These are people get in the news. And reporters sometimes get mad at me, but I'm like, it's a news business. It's a business. And if you aren't sustainable, you either have to wait for a very kind billionaire or get the government to fund you. And neither of those things are particularly good choices. And so you have to build a business.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've spent my life doing is making sure I make a lot of money. And I mean that in profits, not just revenues.
Yeah.
So that I can go away. I'm going to do what I want to do. Like I can pay my bills, move along kind of thing. And so I think that's what I'm talking about, is understanding what's of value to the reader. And some of these companies were just out of whack. And at the same time, in the confluence of events, the Facebooks and Googles of the world were taking over digital advertising. So they couldn't do that. And so where are you going to pivot to from a revenue point of view and make a product that people want? And that's just what's happening. They're not making products people want, or they're making products people want and they're too expensive. So can't do that anymore.
And you actually talked about each part of your business as you moved along,
did.
right? Like you laid out even how much money you made on this. So you guys, you should pick up the book because it actually has has
We always
lessons.
made money, Maria. That's the thing. If you make money,
That's independence. Because you
that's
cannot be
correct.
independent if you cannot make money, right? We talk
That's
about
right.
this. I just came from a budget meeting before I came in here.
Oh,
So,
no.
anyway, your last thoughts on this one, right? Like, I think it is this pivotal moment in history. And
It
you
is
mentioned,
AGI.
the nuclear codes in the Nobel lecture. I compared what happened to our information ecosystem to an atom bomb exploding, but you don't
did. I thought that
have the
was rather.
deaths all coming at the same time, which was what stopped the
No.
world. What makes you optimistic that we're going to be able to do this?
Well,
with the
I
Trump
think
election coming up, right? With the U.S.
Well,
elections.
yeah, right. I don't think that. I think it has a little to do with the internet, and I think it has a lot to do with the American character, the love of Trump, right? I think it goes back, and it's deep. We like a screamy, yelly, strong man. Everybody does, right? In some weird way, because they feel safer. Lack of safety promotes that. I do think there's a lot in tech, whether it's climate change tech or some of this artificial general intelligence that has applications that could really solve cancer. I think they're not just bragging, these tech moguls. I don't think they are. This is really true. It could do a lot of things. It could really streamline businesses in a good way. Unfortunately, jobs are going to be cut, right? I mean, we streamlined farming and we had more food, right? We streamlined manufacturing and we had more goods. Like, that's just things to have. But there's all kinds of ways to think that it could be a good thing and not just a bad thing. And of course, I can think of the 20 bad things, which we have to. So the whole idea is to do these things so that it helps do more of the good things and mitigates the bad things, because you're not going to get rid of bad things altogether. And I use that Paul Virilio quote, and I'll end on this, which is, when you invent the ship, you invent the shipwreck, right? All technology comes with the negativity built into it, right? If you invent the plane, you invent the plane crash at the same time. So in that case, get a lighthouse, or get a radar so you don't crash. So maybe there'll be one crash and not hundreds of them. And that was sort of my message in that regard.
No, that's great. Last question before we close.
All right, you keep saying last.
I know, I'm so sorry, but I have you.
I'm teasing you.
You're talking to the Philippines largely, and you're familiar with what we've lived through. I mean, what words do you have for us?
Stop electing shitty leaders. Sorry. What? I'm sorry, did I say that out loud? I think just the same as our country, we're electing people beneath people, right? We're doing a disservice to ourselves by keeping in the same power structures of people who do not have our interests at heart. What is wrong with that? Why are you doing that? You need to examine yourself. Just the other day, Jon Stewart, when he came back, and he said, you stop blaming everybody. If it's happening like that, it's your fault. It's not your fault. He wasn't saying that. He said, get in there every day and fight. That's what he said.
Yeah.
It's up to you. And it's not that exciting. It's every single day fighting, whether it's in this country for IVF or for immigrants or for whatever, is you can't sit around, gay rights, and you can't sit around and blame them if you don't do something. And so just like your country and our country, stop settling for terrible people to lead you. And what's really disturbing is in the Congress, at least, I'm turning off my heater, sorry, a lot of the really good people are leaving. They are on both sides of the aisle. And the people that are left, it's the old Yeats poem, which is,
the center cannot
the crazies,
hold.
They cannot hold, but not just that, but the noisy and crazy remain, and will all the good people leave. And then we have this beast coming for us. And one of the things I say, and I said it to the Google founders, and I, of course, quoted Yeats, and they didn't get it. But I was like, there's a beast coming.
Yeah.
They always come with these tools.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? And they were like, beast. So I was like, oh my God, it's a poem. It's a metaphor. Every tool that's invented will be used for bad things. We have to mitigate that.
And that is how Kara Swisher holds the line.
I just yell at rich people. That's how I hold the line.
But the poem, I love that poem, The Center Cannot Hold. It's the Yeats poem. So, guys, thank you. Thank you.
The center can hold, by the way. It can. That's not true.
So you disagree with the Yeats quote you quoted?
I think it's fine. I just was like trying to say it's coming so we can do something about it. Stop acting like the beast is going to win. It doesn't have to win. It doesn't.
Agree. And that's part of the reason we keep doing what we do. Kara, thank you so much. Guys, pick up the Burn book. You will not be able to put it down, and you will be reading it laughing out loud. Kara Swisher, thank you so much.
Thank you.